Mr. Speaker, thank you for joining me this evening to talk about a very special group of veterans, the Navajo Code Talkers. Tonight, my colleagues and I are going to share their stories and highlight their amazing accomplishments of this group of warriors. Their contribution to the Allied effort during World War II is widely accredited with winning the Battle of Iwo Jima and making major gains in the Pacific. During the early months of World War II, Japanese intelligence experts broke every code of the U.S. forces in which they devised. The Japanese were able to decode and intercept communications with ease. To combat this, increasingly complex codes were initiated and sometimes took hours at a time, simply to decipher one message. Guadalcanal in 1942 was a turning point for the Allied military forces, who realized that the military communications needed a new direction and new inspiration. Fortunately, an innovative citizen named Philip Johnston had the answer. As the son of a Protestant missionary, Johnston had grown up on the Navajo reservation and was one of less than 30 non-Navajos fluent in the unique Navajo language. He realized that since it had no alphabet and was almost impossible to master without early exposure, the Navajo language was a perfect choice to form a new, impenetrable military code. In 1942, Johnston completed an impressive demonstration of the Navajo language to the commanding general of the Pacific Fleet, headquartered in San Diego. He was then given permission to begin a pilot for the Navajo Code Talker program, and I'd like to submit his letter dated March 8, 1942 for the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Their elite unit was formed in early 1942 when the first of the 29 Navajo Code Talkers were recruited by Johnston. The code was modified and improved throughout the war, but it is so important to note that these 29 Navajo heroes came up with the original code themselves. Accordingly, they are often referred to reverently as the original 29. We will have the honor of reading their names a bit later this evening. Many of these enlistees were just boys with little exposure to the world outside the Navajo reservation. After the war, it was discovered that recruits as young as 15 and as old as 35 years of age had enlisted. In fact, a few of these men traveled to other towns on the reservation, outside their clan where no one knew them and their true age, in order to enlist underage and serve their country. After sailing through basic training, the Navajo Code Talkers were sent to Marine divisions in the Pacific theater of World War II. Their reputation as innovators soon spread far and wide amongst their commanding officers in the field. They were not allowed to write any part of the code down as a reference. In fact, the code existed only amongst this small group. Under high-pressure battle conditions, the Code Talkers had to quickly recall their code accurately or risk hundreds or thousands of lives. Make no mistake about the gravity of this accomplishment. The Navajo Code Talkers created the only unbroken code in modern military history. It baffled the Japanese forces. It was even indecipherable to a Navajo soldier taken prisoner and tortured on Bataan. The secret code created by the Navajo Code Talkers was a simple marvel of linguistic invention. It contained native terms that were associated with specialized or commonly used military language, as well as native terms that represented letters in the alphabet. English words with no Navajo translation were spelled out using the Navajo alphabet. The selection of a given term was based on the first letter of the English meaning of the Navajo word. For words that did not translate into Navajo, the Code Talkers created code that did not directly translate, but tended to resemble the things with which they were associated. For example, the Navajo word for ironfish represented submarine. I could give many more examples, but I think the one is more particularly poignant. To say America, the Code Talkers used the word Nahamya, which means our mother. This brilliant code allowed our U.S. Marines to communicate quickly and accurately. The Code Talkers' brave work is widely credited with the successes of battles in the Pacific, and more ultimately with helping to end this tragic war. In the battle for Iwo Jima, in the first 48 hours alone, they coded over 800 transmissions with perfect accuracy. While the true heroism of these brave warriors is known today, sadly the Code Talkers had to return home after the war without the hero's welcome they deserved. Ironically, the code was such a precious asset to the U.S. military that it was classified and had to be kept secret. While the code was declassified in 1968, it took years to properly decorate those veterans. In 2001, nearly 60 years after they created their legendary code, the Navajo Code Talkers finally received their well-deserved Congressional Medals of Honor. Today, only one original Code Talker remains, but the tradition lives on. A delegation of the Four Corners states will attempt to recognize these warriors one by one and give us their thoughts during this hour. And I would like to first recognize my good friend from Arizona, Mr. Flake.
I thank the gentleman for yielding and for arranging for this special order. This is something that we in Arizona and anywhere in the West, in Utah and elsewhere, have great pride in. That this recognition, as the gentleman mentioned, came far too late and has been far too little given the amount of the impact that the Navajo Code Talkers had on World War II. So I'm pleased to be here and to lend my voice to recognition when, as the gentleman mentioned, only one of the original Code Talkers is still living, and so I think it's important that we recognize others who carried on this code and tradition and helped out in this way. This was a group, as we mentioned, of many Navajos and Native Americans who volunteered for the armed services in World War II. This was, as the gentleman said, very successful. It was the only code that remained unbroken. And one of the most amazing aspects of World War II is how these people came together. As the gentleman mentioned, young kids in their teen years and others, and volunteered for this effort. It's even more remarkable when we note that many states did not permit Native Americans to vote until the 1950s. Yet the Code Talkers were undeterred. They wanted to help their country. It's fitting that we honor this group on the anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor, the start of World War II, because they had such an integral part of ensuring that brutal war came to an end. I want to thank my colleague from Arizona and others who've come here for putting together this timely tribute to make sure that these individuals are recognized for the impact that they had in ending this war and to ensure that this world remains free. I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. I would like to this time acknowledge my good friend from New Mexico, Mr. Lujan.
I thank my colleague from Arizona, Mr. Gosar, for bringing us together tonight as we get a chance to visit and celebrate heroes that are amongst us, whether it's in spirit or in body, as we are still so fortunate to have Chester Nez with us, one of the original 29 as well. And with me tonight, I have a few excerpts of articles that have been written around the country that capture some stories. Recently in the Fronteras desk, an author by the name of Laurel Morales captured a story of Chester Nez. And it starts like this: growing up in New Mexico, Chester Nez and many of his fellow Navajo were punished for speaking their language. You talk about a language as they were pulled away to boarding schools, so many of the young Navajo across the country, and the importance of what they were able to accomplish during World War II. In the words of Major Howard Connor of the 5th Marine Division, he declared that were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would have never taken Iwo Jima. The importance of language and what they were able to accomplish. The article goes on to read that years later, Nez was shocked to learn that he'd been recruited by the Marines specifically to devise a code using the same language the government tried to beat out of him. It was extremely ironic. One of the very things they were forbidden to do, speak Navajo, ended up helping us save the war. And Mr. Nez goes on to say that he and his fellow code talkers first developed an alphabet that, as you described, Mr. Gosar, using everyday Navajo words to represent letters of words. As you talked about submarine, ironfish, beshlo, which is spelled B-E-S-H-L-O, hummingbird, da-het-ti-hi, to talk about fighter planes. And it's amazing how, when we talk about the Japanese and how they were so effective at cracking codes, how they couldn't crack this one. Mr. Nez goes on to say in the article that being one of the last original code talkers living in Albuquerque with his son, father of 6 children, he has 9 grandchildren and 8 grandchildren, great-grandchildren. And it goes on to say that today, with so many people leaving the reservation, Navajo elders like Nez fear that language is dying. Nez hopes Navajo children learn the story of code talkers so they understand just how critical it is to earn their own language. And bringing us together, Mr. Gosar, I think this evening to help celebrate the history of our code talkers, as it wasn't until Senator Bingaman moved legislation back in 2000 to be able to give an honor of our original 29, a few of them at the very least, and their families with gold medals, and silver medals to the others that were also trained to go on. And so I think this is an example of a few stories that we'll be submitting and sharing this evening to be able to celebrate the lives and stories and the history, especially on today as we remember Pearl Harbor and all of the sacrificed families, all the families that we lost that day, so many brave soldiers as well. So thanks for bringing us tonight. I look forward to many stories and continue to share many of the articles that we've been able to find, capturing the history and personal stories of our friends, our heroes, the code talkers from all throughout New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah.
I thank the gentleman from New Mexico. At this time, I'd like to recognize my good friend from Utah, Mr. Shavitz.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the bipartisan nature in which we do this. These are truly American heroes who've made a difference in our lives, and something we should all be proud of and never forget. I worry as these gentlemen get older that somehow generations in the future will maybe forget this, and I appreciate you, Mr. Gosar, for your commitment to them. I know you're passionate about this. I can see it in your eyes when we talk about it. I wanted to recognize and pay special tribute to somebody who's originally from Utah, Samuel Tom Holliday. He was a Navajo code talker, served in the United States Marine Corps, 4th Marine Division, 25th Regiment, the H&S Company. We're fortunate to still have him here with us here in our presence today. But Mr. Holliday was born in 1924 on a Navajo reservation near the Monument Valley area of Utah, down near the Four Corners area. He was a Navajo code talker in World War II, and as you have talked about before, code talkers transmitted tactical messages by telephone and radio in the Dene language. It was a code the Japanese were never able to break and were very instrumental in our war efforts. At a young age, Samuel and his brothers hid from government agents who came to send Navajo children to boarding schools. Holliday said he was ultimately caught and forced to attend a boarding school where he was not allowed to speak his native language. As he said, quote, "One of the hardest times I had was learning to talk English. I would hide cookies in my pockets to pay the older boys to teach me English. Whenever they, the school instructors, found out I had talked Navajo, they made me scrub the floor, scrub the walls. I spent much of my first year scrubbing the walls." End quote. Mr. Holliday attended the school until he was 18 years old, and he was recruited into the Marine Corps. Mr. Holliday served in the Pacific Theater from 1943 to 1945, Saipan, Tinian, Kwajalein Atoll, and at Iwo Quote from Mr. Holliday, quote, "A lot of time they sent us where it was a very dangerous spot, and I sent message. They didn't know we were Navajo code talker, using Navajo language." End quote. The very language he was punished for using in his boarding school was suddenly a major asset to the United States Marines. Mr. Holliday remains active with the Navajo Code Talkers Association. He's traveled throughout most of the United States conducting presentations about the Code Talkers and about his life experiences before and after the war. I was very pleased to see that Mr. Holliday was awarded the Congressional Silver Medal, something he was very worthy of, obviously. It's interesting to me that the Navajo Code Talker program was actually a secret until after the war and was not declassified until later in 1968. It was another 14 years before the Navajo Code Talkers were recognized by the United States government. And in fact, in December of 1981, President Ronald Reagan recognized the Code Talkers for their dedicated service, unique achievement, patriotism, resourcefulness, and courage. August 14, 1982 was proclaimed National Navajo Code Talkers Day. I think President Reagan did the right thing. I think it's something to all Americans. I want my kids and people in Utah and across the nation to recognize the contributions and sacrifices that these people made. They truly made a difference in our lives, instrumental in the war, and I appreciate this time to be able to recognize their achievements and their participation and help to our country. That I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Utah. I would like at this time to recognize my friend and the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Heinrich.
Well, I want to thank the gentleman from Arizona for pulling us together from around the four corners to honor these incredible Native Americans, these incredible Americans, especially on this historic anniversary. And I'm certainly honored to join my colleagues tonight to honor the quiet valor of all the Navajo Code Talkers. Today, some 6 decades since their service during World War II, only one of the original 29 Code Talkers, Corporal Chester Nez, survives. And I am incredibly proud of Corporal Nez, who at the age of 90 resides in my Congressional district in Albuquerque with his son Mike, his daughter-in-law Rita, and their children. Corporal Nez's story is much like the hundreds of Code Talkers who followed in his footsteps. He grew up on the Navajo Nation, the parents who grew corn and pinto beans, kept goats and sheep, and he grew up in a time when Navajos were sharply mistreated and even unable to vote in our own elections in places throughout the Southwest. Yet in 1942, at the age of 18, he sprung into action and he joined the 382nd Platoon in a role that is largely credited with saving thousands of American lives. Along with the other 28 original Code Talkers, Corporal Nez developed a code from their unwritten language. You can find the code's explanation today in the index of his autobiography. And whether in artillery, tanks, aboard ships, or in infantry, the Code Talkers played a vital role in some of the worst battles of the Pacific Theater, communicating battlefield codes that were never, ever broken by the enemy. Their code talking was considered so essential to the war that, unlike their counterparts, many of them were forced to serve straight through the war with no breaks for rest, trips back home, and today we widely recognize that their service helped turn the course of World War II. Yet because of the sheer secret nature of their role and the possibility that they'd be called back for the same duty in the future, the actions of the Code Talkers weren't declassified until 23 years after the war ended. And it wasn't until 55 years later that they were bestowed with the Congressional Gold Medal of Honor and Silver Medal. To the young people of the Navajo Nation, for whom Corporal Nez's quiet valor is a remarkable example, I encourage you to carry on his legacy by keeping the Navajo Nation, Navajo language alive and well for generations to come. Mr. Speaker, I know that the Navajo Nation takes such pride in these heroes, and on behalf of all of us who owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to their service, I'm proud to recognize the courage, service, and bravery of all the Navajo Code Talkers, and especially Corporal Nez of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I yield back to my friend from Arizona.
I thank the gentleman from New Mexico for that fine. Now I'd like to acknowledge my good friend from Arizona, Mr. Schweiker.
Thank you, Congressman Gosar. And for all of us, we truly appreciate you organizing this. When you consider today is, what, the 70th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, and you know, in the entry into World War II, for many of us that grew up with family that had served, there's many heartbreaking stories. But when we reach out and read and learn more about the Code Talkers' story, it's one of the great moments of pride for those of us from Arizona. When you consider my understanding is there was about 400 Native Americans who served. but the 27, was it 27 or 29?
29.
29 from Arizona. I've had the pleasure over time of meeting some of them, and I also know as Arizona now is about to begin celebrating its 100th anniversary, and I have actually, it's a little bit of a silly photo, but there's actually a smaller version of this on my wall in my office. A few months ago, we had our very first celebration of beginning the one-year celebration of our centennial as a state, and we were featuring our Navajo code talkers. It is something that many of us from the West are very, very proud of. And it was also that little moment where if you ever want to be a little humiliated, have them try to teach you to speak a few Navajo words, and then the giggling begins on how badly you pronounce it. But for anyone who's listening, the Navajo Code Talkers have actually built a foundation, and they actually have a wonderful website that has data and stories. It is NavajoCodeTalkers.org, and I encourage anyone to reach out and grab some of that information. These are powerful stories of incredible service to our country in a time of great need with a very unique skill and talent. And Mr. Gosar, thank you for organizing this, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Arizona. I want to take just a few moments and honor one of our own in Arizona who just recently died. It's my humble privilege to honor Alan Dale June, one of the original 29 Code Talkers. He died just recently in September of 2010 at the age of 91. He passed away of natural causes at the Veterans Hospital in Prescott, Arizona, which is in my district. He is survived by his wife and 10 children and was buried in Kaibito in the heart of Navajo Reservation. June, who attained the rank of sergeant, received the Congressional Gold Medal in 2001 along with other members of the original Code Talkers. When he died, Navajo Nation Council Speaker Lawrence Morgan said, "The Navajo Nation lost a great warrior. His unique service to his country brought positive attention to the Navajo Nation. He will be missed." According to his wife, Virginia, June first tried to sign up for the Marines in his hometown of Kaibito, but a recruiter told him he was too young. He then traveled to the reservation town of Chinle to enlist because he figured people there wouldn't recognize him. And he could lie about his age and forge his father's signature. This dedication and determination to serve their country was common among the Code Talkers and shows character and bravery that we all should emulate. Although Alan June was a humble man, he did not like to brag about much, even his remarkable service as a Code Talker. However, in the last years of his life, he wore his service proudly, sporting a red Navajo Code Talker cap with his name on it. I would like to take an opportunity and see if my colleague from New Mexico would entertain a colloquy back and forth, giving the roll call of the names of the 29.
It would certainly be an honor, Mr. Gosar.
Thank you, sir. The roll call for the Navajo Code Talkers, the original 29. Charlie Y. Begay.
Roy Al Begay.
Samuel Begay.
John Ashi Benali.
Wilsey Bitsy.
Kosi S. Brown.
John Brown, Jr.
John Chi.
Benjamin Cleveland.
Eugene R. Crawford.
David Curley.
Lowell S. Damon.
George H. Dennison.
James Dixon.
Carl N. Gorman.
Oscar B. Litma.
Alan Dale June.
Alfred Leonard.
Johnny R. Manuelito.
William McCabe.
Chester Nez.
Jack Nez.
Lloyd Oliver.
Joe Palmer.
Frank Danny Pete.
Nelson S. Thompson.
Harry Sosi.
John Willie.
William Dean Wilson. Does my friend have any further comments?
Mr. Gosar, I would only ask unanimous consent to submit into the record an article from the Santa Fe New Mexican dated 8/29/2010, also capturing a storytelling and talking about Mr. Chester Nez, as well as the article The Last of the Navajo Code Talkers by Laurel Morales, which was listed in the Fronteras desk. And again, Mr. Gosar, as we celebrate tonight, to never forget about the contributions of the Navajo people.
Without objection, so ordered.
To never forget about the contributions of the Navajo people to our great nation, with the work that they've done not only through the Cold War, but going back to all the work that was done. And as we pointed out earlier, in the words of Major Howard Connor, if it were not for the Navajos, the Marines never would have taken Iwo Jima. It's a great night to be here to celebrate, and I thank you for bringing us together.
I thank the gentleman from New Mexico. Thank you for your contribution. I would also like to start by going through the further list of the Navajo Code Talkers in the honor roll. Dan Aki, Franklin Anthony, Jimmy Apache, Benny Arviso, Earl Ashiki, Regis Ashley, Harold Atakai, John Augustine, Louis Aziz, Henry Bahi, Woody Bahi, Benjamin Baldwin, Harold Beard, Roy Becenti, Sidney Bedoni, Carlos Begay, Charlie Sosi Begay, Fleming Begay, George Begay, Henry Begay, Jerry C. Begay, Joe Begay, Lee Begay, Leo Begay, Leonard Begay, Nota Begay, Paul Begay, Samuel H. Begay, Thomas H. Begay, Walter Begay, Willie K. Begay, Wilson J. Begay, David M. Begody, Roger Begody, Wilmer Belinda, Harry Baloney, Jimmy D. Benally, Harrison Lee Benally, Harry Benally, Jimmy L. Benally, Johnson D. Benally, Samuel Benally, Willie Benton Sr., John Bernard, Lloyd Batone, Andrew Bai, Welford Billy, Ben Billy, Howard Billiman, Samuel Billison, Sam Jones Billy, Peter J. Bitsy, Delford Bitsoy, Jesse Bizzardi, Jesse Black, Paul Blatchford, David Bluehorse, John Henry Bauman, Robert Bauman, Arthur Brown, Clarence Paul Brown, Sosie Herman Brown, William Tully, Wilford Buck, Bobby Burke, Jose Burney, Francis Burnside, Sandy Burr, William Cadman, Andrew Colito, Oscar Sosie Carroll, Dennis Cattle Chaser, Del Calidito, Ralph Calidito, Carson Bahi Charlie, Sam Charlie, Frederick Chase, George Chavez, Guy Chi, Stuart Claw, Thomas Claw, Billy Cleveland, Ned Cleveland, Leslie Cody, James Charles Cohill, Bobby Eltiti Craig, Carrie Key Crawford, Walter Kronmeyer, Billy Crosby, Carl Cassini, J. Ray Dale, Anson C. Damon, Tully Davis, Martin Day Deal, Dan Dia, Leo Dennison, Jerome Cody Dodge, John Dooley, Richardson Dooley, Nelson Draper, Teddy Draper Sr., Key Etsity, Deswood Etsity, Harold Evans, Ray Foghorn, Jimmy Francisco, Joseph Gatewood, William George, Milton Gishall, Jimmy Gleason, John Goodluck, Tom Gorman, Bill Grayson, Yazzie Gray Mountain, Billy Louis Garito, Tully Gusting, Charles Guy, Ben Williams Harding, Jack W. Harding, Tom Hardy, Emmett Harrison, Ross Hoschke, Roy Orville Hawthorne, Bud Haycock, Leslie Hemstreet, Albert Henry, Edmund Juan Henry, Kent Carl Henry, Dean Lujan Hickman, Calvin Holliday, Samuel Tom Holliday, Johnson Housewood, Denny Houstein, Ambrose Howard, Arthur Jose Hubbard, Louis Hudson, Tom Hunter, Benjamin James, Billy James, George B. James, Elliot Tolley, Charlie T. John, Leroy M. John Sr., Edmund Johns, Earl Johnny, Deswood R. Johnson, Francis T. Johnson, Johnny Johnson, Peter Johnson, Ralph Johnson, Jack Jones, Tom H. Jones, Jr., David Jordan, Floyd June, Percy Keems, Wilson Kinda, Joe Kelwood, Alonzo Kelscoli, Bahi Ketchum, Jimmy King, Paul Kitchenchenny, John Kinsel, George H. Kirk, Leo Kirk, Mike Kanani, Rex Kontz, Harrison Laffey, James Largo, Keith M. Little, Tommy K. Lopez, Peter McDonald, Max Malone, Rex Malone, Robert Malone, James Maloney, Paul E. Maloney, Ben C. Manuelito, Ira Manuelito, James C. Manuelito, Peter Manuelito, Frank Marianito, Robert Mark, Matthew Martin, Jose Martinez, Archibald McCraith, King Paul Mike, General Miles, Tom Claw Moffett, Jack C. Morgan, Ralph Morgan, Joe Morris, George Moss, Oscar P. Maltine, Calvin H. Murphy, Adolph N. Nagurski, James T. Nakai, Jr., Peter Nakadeni, Sr., Martin Felix Napa, Harding Nagale, Alfred Newman, Arthur Nez, Freeland Nez, Israel Holstein Nez, Sidney Nez, Roy Nata, Willie Anthony Nata, Billy Odell, Willard V. Oliver, Leighton Paddock, Robert D. Paul, Paul A. Parrish, Amos Roy Patrick, David Earl Patterson, Alfred James Peaches, Sam Pescali, Joe Peterson Sr., Gall Guy Pinto, John Senator Pinto, Richard Platero, Jimmy Preston, Sam Reed, Harry C. Roanhouse, Horse, Andy Sage, Denny Sage, Jerry E. Sababai, Peter P. Sandoval, Samuel F. Sandoval, Thomas Sandoval, John Scott, John C. Sells, Freddie Shields, Dooley Shorty, Robert T. Shorty, Joe A. Silversmith, Sammy Silversmith, Oscar Jones Singer, Richard Singer, Wilson Chi Skeet, Richard T. Slinky, Albert J. Slivers Sr., Arsenio Smiley, Albert Smith, George Smith, Raymond R. Smith, Samuel Jesse Smith, George B. Soxie, Benjamin J. Sorrell, Harry Spencer, Johnny Tabaha, Alfred Taw, Edward Taw, John N. Talley, Bert Talsalt, Edward Thomas, Richard Thomas, Claire M. Thompson, Everett M. Thompson, Francis T. Thompson, Frank T. Thompson, Carleone Tadachin, Frank Carl Tadachin, Benson Tohi, Curtis Toledo, Frank Toledo, Preston Toledo, Willie Toledo, Joseph H. Town, Zane Town, Chester H. So, Paul B. So, Paul Edward So, Samuel So, Alfred Sosi, Cecil G. Sosi, Collins D. Sosi, Kenneth Sosi, Samuel Sosi Sr., John Upshaw, William Upshaw, Joe Vandever, Oliver Wagner, Stephen Wallace, Robert Wally, John Warito, Lyman J. Whitman, Frank Willetto, Jr., Frankie Chi Willetto, Alex Williams, Kenneth Williams, George B. Willie, Clarence Bahi Woody, Ernest Yazzie, Harrison A. Yazzie, Peter Yaza, Vincent Yaza, Clifton Yazzie, Daniel Yazzie, Eddie Melvin Yazzie, Edison Key Yazzie, Felix Yazzie, Francis Yazzie, Frank H. Yazzie, Harolding Yazzie, Harold Yazzie, Joe Shorty Yazzie, John Yazzie, Justin D. Yazzie, Lemuel Reverend Yazzie, Ned Yazzie, Pahid Dent Yazzie, Raphael Yazzie, Robert Yazzie, William Yazzie, Leon Yellowhair, Stanley Yellowhair, Howard Yellowman, George Yo, Henry Za. Listed but not confirmed: Johnny Alfred, Perry Allen, Ned Becenti, Edward Begay, Jimmy Begay, Johnson Begay, Ned Brown, Jimmy Clark, King Fowler, Harvey Gray, Nevi Jensen, Teddy Jose, Jesse Kenpaugh, Herbert Morgan, Sam Morgan, Howard Nez, Howard H. Nez, Tom Otero, Tom Singer, Ignoc Smith, Jerome Sorrell, David W. Sosi, Howard Sosi, Howard J. Sosi, Joe Reed Whitman, William Wilson, Charlie H. Yazzie, Sam W. Yazzie. Pending waiting records: Anderson Edwards, N.A. Brown, Francis Burnside, Reuben Curley, Alfred David, Richard Dooley, Howard Ye Foster, Edwin Freeman, Emmett Goldtooth, Billy Goldman, Roger Hawthorne, H. Jake, William Keene, George Leroy, Edward Loop, Johnson Naswood, David Peterson, Joe Price, Wilson H. Price, Merrill Leone Sandoval, Peter Tracy, Woody B. Sosi, Buster Vizalea. Those not listed: Don Bayi, Willie Barber, Fleming Begay, Charlie Begay, Askey Burbank, Guy Chaucy, Jake Hashiani, Carl Henry Kent, Livingston, Lodvadato Joe, Martin Martinez, Wallace Pulaski, Jr. It is with that I submit those names on a wonderful treasure from the Four Corners to America. And what they gave this country is so valuable. And you look back on their lives, and what they gave us is immeasurable. What I'd also like to do is honor them on today, the anniversary of Pearl Harbor. And I hope that we would look fondly on their attributes and what they gave to this great country, because we are all great because of them. I also want to take the liberty of acknowledge one other person. It's her birthday today. It's my mom. She turned 78. Happy birthday, Mom. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back.
I know you were not able to attend, but...
All right, well, I'm mid-count.
There we go. Is that Doug? Yeah. See, fun. Do it on the fly.
For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
Ask permission to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, on this, the 70th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor, I want to recognize a group of unique Americans who made an invaluable contribution to winning the war in the Pacific, Native American code talkers. John Warito of Southwest Colorado was assigned to the 4th Marine Division in Maui, Hawaii. He first saw action when his division landed in Rorinamur, part of the Marshall Islands, then a Japanese stronghold. From there, the 4th Division took Saipan, where Warito was wounded. After recovering from his injuries, he took part in the invasion of Iwo Jima, where he was wounded a second time. He recovered from his injuries on a hospital ship at sea after refusing to be sent home to the U.S. because he wanted to be part of the invasion of Japan, should that be necessary. Back home, Warito settled in Denver, where he served as a letter carrier for the U.S. Postal Service. He passed away in 1983 and is buried at Fort Logan National Cemetery in Colorado. Warito was posthumously awarded the Silver Congressional Medal of Honor in 2002. His widow Rose and children Nellie and Michael attended the ceremony in Window Rock, Arizona, on the Navajo Nation. I thank Mr. Warito for his courage in fighting a brutal enemy in the Pacific. The code walkers of all tribes are a special class of brave warriors who deserve our continued recognition. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back.
Step forward toward me.
Water.
How much time?
30 seconds. It's a very long calendar.
When you're waiting.
Seniority?
What purpose does he?
For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move the House do now adjourn.
The question on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow.
Today, the House approved motions related to the fiscal year 2012 military